Thank you, Mano. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, as was echoed before. Nice to see former colleagues, mentors, and friends. So Veena's talk nicely sets up to look at both Colorado and India. Two of the topics that I've been working last more than 20-25 years, something that's very close to my heart. I'm also currently as a Fulbright fellow, climate fellow visiting India, so I have some first-hand experiences on some of the water issues that will complement what Veena highlighted. Sorry. So what I want to provide you is a context in these two places, those seemingly disparate and at far ends of the earth, that you will find that there's lots of things that are quite similar and things that can be learned from both sides. Colorado River, as you all very well know, is the lifeblood of the southwest US, and it's very important for the way of life, culture, society, economy, even religion, one could argue, in the West. Similarly, in India, even more so, the monsoonal rains that bring water to the country is very much similar to the snow that brings water to southwest, and then you have to wait until next year for the water to come. So the similarities of their scope in terms of how they reach various parts of society, or all parts of society, is something that is quite interesting and sort of fascinating. And you can see these are the two maps, and I'll come back to. I'll start with the Colorado River. I'll sort of provide a context in terms of the past, current, and future variability, and what are the challenges, and then I will do the same for the Indian context as well. So on the Colorado River, of course, we know where the water is used, and here I want to highlight the current crisis that we are in is largely driven by increase in demand and a general decline in supply. And if you look at where the water is used, again, I don't have to tell this audience, a good majority of it is used in agriculture. And this also provides some interesting opportunities and challenges. And this agriculture, while much of it is grown in the southern or the lower parts of the basin, also has national ramifications. The entire country benefits from the agriculture that's produced here. So it's not, whenever we talked about economic solutions, one also has to think about, it's not just local trade-offs in terms of economy, but also the entire country benefits and even beyond the country, and how is that factored into account is important. The point I want to highlight, here is the this is the flow in the river, and as you know, 85% of the flow is produced in the upper basin, 15% in the lower basin, roughly that's the split. Of that 85%, almost all of it is produced in the high elevation regions of the Rockies. And this is the Colorado River flow, and you can see there's a steady decline, we all know. And around 2022 is when all the compacts or the agreements were written of how the water is to be shared. And notice that it was written right when the river was at its wettest. And I'll put that in the context a little bit later. So the issue in the basin is the declining flow, increasing demand, and then these sort of interesting quirks of water laws and compacts and how the water is distributed adds to this kind of structural deficit that is very well known of something of the order of 1 to 1.4 million acre feet per year. So this is something that's baked in, and it has not come to the fore over the years simply because the demand was lower, so we could kind of get through. But everything is now coming to a head because where the demand is increased relative to the supply, and suddenly the structural deficit is much more glaring and much more sort of prominent. Okay. And when the compacts were written, this is how they had to get it through. Even at the time, there were voices that said we don't have enough water, we might have to be much more conservative. But of course, anything big that needs to be pushed through requires a lot of compromise. So they ended up creating a lot of paper water to kind of get the agreements through. And in fact, some interesting things about that period is there were voices that said, well, we know it's a problem, but future generations will be smart enough and they will figure it out. So this is there in congressional testimony. And here we are with the future generation. So some of the backstory, and this is where currently the system is. And notice that in the last 2 decades, also known as the millennial drought, there's a steady decline of reservoirs, and this is Lake, I think this is Lake Powell, where it is right now. So again, I don't have to highlight, but this is the current water crisis on the Colorado River. And this has led to a lot of such stories in the last several years. And also it has led to interesting research and creative ideas. Dennis mentioned about the context of the current crisis. The last two millennium, or last 2 decades rather, notice that this is the flow, declining precipitation, increasing temperature. And there's lots of papers that are coming about as to why this is happening. Is it related to temperature or is it precipitation? But what we can see is that regardless of the why it happened or who did it, if you are a water manager, it doesn't really matter. You are in a drought and you have to manage the system, right? So there is that part of why that's fascinating for several of us. But then there's also the systems management side, where you have less water. How do you manage? Are your systems available to handle that? And again, here are some statistics. A lot of the droughts are all in the recent period, not surprising. And how much of this is this decline? We also saw decline in the past. How much of this current decline is due to natural variability, or a combination of natural variability and anthropogenic? That is sort of the fascinating research debate that is going on. Okay. I will also point out that the storage that we have on the system, which is like no other in the world, 4 times the annual average flow, is both a boon and a bane. Boon because that helps us tide over the droughts. Bane because we have the storage, and it also in many ways hampers, and what I have seen is hampers some creativity, because you are now fighting over the storage as opposed to stepping back and looking at things in a more creative manner. Okay, this is the past, and again, Dennis did allude to that if you look at tree rings, there have been periods in the past where such long, prolonged droughts have come about, and you can see them here. And what is interesting is that wet period that we saw in the early part of 20th century is actually the anomalous. So in other words, one of the things that we should start doing is to behave that we are in a semi-arid place and look at the system both in terms of the climate. So we are never going to get wet periods like this for long stretches of time. In fact, the dry periods are probably more the norm. And so coming up with creative solutions to live harmoniously with that is very important. So this kind of puts the past in context. And then the future, Dennis talked about, so I won't go into detail, anywhere between 10 to 30% decline, depending upon whatever sensitivities you take into account, precip, temperature, or combination. This is something to be content with. And even if you see some increase due to precipitation changes, it is still small, nothing like what we could go back to the 20th century. And in terms of reliability, what we find is that somewhere around 12.5 to 13 is sort of the reliable yield that we should be planning for. And interestingly, the agreement that was reached last year ends up in that place. So whether we like it or not, de facto, this is sort of the number and not the 15 million acre feet that is in the compact that that's being used currently, but this is sort of where we should be planning, and that would get us into a more sustainable future. Then I'll switch gears into to look at how the water issue in the Indian context, and these are some of the things that I just pointed out, so I'll skip through and then I'll come back. So the Indian monsoon, this is something I can talk for hours. This is one of the most fascinating climate system in the world, in that this is one of the places where the winds change direction 180 degrees over such a large areas. And this is what I would call monsoon. And in fact, I joke that everybody has monsoon envy. They all call their summer rains monsoon, when in fact, for those of us who have lived in India and grown up there, no, that doesn't cut it. But I always chuckle during summer watching the weather forecast. Oh, we have monsoonal system, but nothing like this. So this is the actual monsoon, where it sustains for 4 months, June to September. And so it's not like some, couple of days of, rainstorm events. And it pervades, and it's got long history for millennia, going back, trade, religion, cultures have exploited the monsoonal winds, and it pervades all aspects of life. This is rain and malaria, rain and dengue, rain and agriculture. And so when you have less rains, as Veena said, immediately everybody feels it. And this is the spatial variability, and you can see lots of rains along the western coast, northeast, dry in the central, south central, and everything, and all kinds of variability. So how do you contend with this kind of spatial variability, billion plus population, and agriculture, most of it is rain-fed. Okay. And extremes increasing. So this is something that was also talked about, and this is showing that increasing frequency of droughts and floods. These are number of districts that are in droughts, districts that are in floods, and you can see that there is increasing spatial extent of these extremes. And a recent report by CEW, one of the centers there, points out that the only way you can build resiliency in the country is through improved public early warnings. In fact, a lot of the technology, a lot of the infrastructure solutions are quite challenging, particularly in the urban context. And what we can do is provide very good early warning systems, and that's where data, sensors, AI, and everything can come and help out. Okay. Two things I want to point out. This is something I was there last December in India when this floods happens. This is the December 2nd, 4th, 2023 floods in Chennai, which is a southeastern city where my parents live. And you can see there was a flood in 2015, almost identical in terms of the rainfall signature, and also both of them also were during El Nino years. And the flooding happened due to rain and also due to management or lack thereof of the water resources surrounding the city. So they didn't have good early warning system, so they wait until last minute, they see the rains coming, and then they open the reservoirs. And so what should have been a flood event suddenly ends up being a disaster, because you have rains plus you have all this big water coming from all the reservoirs that are being just opened out. So again, the management of water, extremely important, not just for water resources, but also for flooding as well here. And this is to show under a warmer scenario for India, more so than the rainfall or the monsoon disappearing, it is the number of warm days or hot days, and Peter pointed out in his remarks, 40 degree centigrade days, 2 or 3 weeks here. And in India, that means the mortality increases significantly. Meaning if you have 40 degrees and more for 2 or 3 days, you have lots of people who don't have cooling facilities suddenly with heat strokes, stressing the public health system. So what we find is that the climate change is going to have a bigger impact in terms of societal tipping rather than monsoon disappearing or monsoon weakening. In fact, this is what we highlight as very important as the extremes. increasing both rainfall and heat, which then influencing the public health, agriculture. And so I leave you with this, which is the climate impacts both agriculture, economy, and health in a way much more tightly coupled in places like India, where you have, infrastructure is not at the level of what we have to mask some of the climate impacts. And so that, what we find is more of a tipping point. There's a lot of opportunities in terms of what can be done. Okay, and I think as to the water challenges, I echo what Veena had. Again, in terms of people with access to drinking water. And I want to point out just this. This is current as of now. If you go online and look for news, this is water scarcity in India's Silicon Valley. This is Bangalore going through severe water crisis, also because last year was El Nino year, monsoon was weaker, and you ended up with less rain. And what I want to point out is that a lot of these people have in their pockets the latest iPhone or latest Android, and it emphasizes, and as civil engineers I highlight, it's very easy to bring technology, but it's extremely difficult to get drinking water or indoor plumbing. And so that is what makes everything else possible, and that will be the limiting. If you don't have good drinking water, if you don't have good water infrastructure, everything else doesn't happen magically. I think I'll stop there, and I will leave with this slide and answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks very much, Balaji. We didn't get any questions online either. And so to maybe catch up with the schedule, because we are running a fair bit behind, we'll move on to the next stage. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.